like to just invite you in to share your wisdom, these practical steps for living in oneness.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that everything that both Panache and Neil have said, I agree with completely. And as you were talking, Panache, in my mind was replaying the Coleman Barks translation of the Rumi poem, The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And I want to pick up on the guide from beyond part. And that is when you find that you have certain emotions that overtake you frequently, like maybe you have a lot of anger, or maybe you're depressed, or maybe you have a lot of anxiety. It's really very, very helpful, as you said, Neil, to recontextualize this. These are all portals. They're all doors to awakening, to transformation. And as a psychologist and as a scientist, as well as somebody certainly who has had lots of wonderful direct spiritual experience over the years, for which I'm incredibly grateful, I would say that the most important thing is not to do a spiritual bypass on your emotions. I know so many people who, try to do that. The emotion comes up, but they're not really looking at the doorway that it provides. So if you have a lot of fear, or if you have a lot of depression or anger, what needs to happen first is to really do the healing of your early life and early experience, which has to do with really noticing what are the patterns that you either inherited from your mother and father, or the patterns that you manifest because you just didn't want to be like them. And when we go back and experience forgiveness and compassion for our parents and take a look at those patterns in ourselves, they actually begin to lose some of their unconscious power over us. There are many ways to do that. One way, I've been on the advisory board of the Hoffman Institute for, maybe 20 years. And I think that particular process, HOFFMAN, Hoffman Institute, really helps people work through some of this early conditioning, which, of course, is unconscious. So now I want to get to very practical tips once you've done that kind of work on brain science. So just a little lesson here. The two parts of your brain I'm going to talk about are the prefrontal cortex, which lies right beneath your forehead, and underneath that, your midbrain. And in the midbrain are things like the reward center, the hippocampus, where memory is located, the amygdala, which most people know is a center. It's a survival center. We feel fear for good reason because it's survival based. And what happens is this: as soon as fear and anger, which live in the midbrain, take over, it cuts off the activity in the prefrontal cortex. In the prefrontal cortex lie your conscious thinking and actions, the way that you interact with the external world. So, in other words, do you have a goal of oneness? That whole idea and set of behaviors resides in your prefrontal cortex. But if you're absolutely furious most of the time, the fury trumps the remembering that goes on in the activity that goes on in the prefrontal cortex that leads to certain behaviors and actions. So what the new interpersonal neurobiology has really revealed very, very well is how is it that you marry your prefrontal cortex to your midbrain so that your afflictive emotions, that's a word that the Tibetan Buddhists use, your more afflictive emotions that cut you off from your true nature, from the oneness, from the divinity within and within all things. How is it that you can use these afflictive emotions to really move to a sense of unity? And one of the ways that you can do that, of course, is there are several ways. It's through meditation, particularly the kind of meditation where you're really keyed in, you're watching your breath, just watching your breath, being curious about your breath, actually does some fantastic things physiologically. And what it does is it calms down the amygdala, the fight or flight system, and it allows your best self and your prefrontal cortex to come forward. Dan Siegel, the psychiatrist I mentioned previously, has a wonderful exercise that I'd like to share called the Wheel of Awareness. And he said, if you think of the hub of the wheel, the center of the wheel is like a visual metaphor for your prefrontal cortex. It's where the wisdom is, the being keyed in to the compassion, the resilience, the larger whole. And we get there from time to time, kind of naturally, but we can get there more easily if we consciously ride on the breath. Then if you think of that as the hub of the wheel and the breathing as to what gets you there, we're always putting out spokes of attention. So think of a bicycle wheel. Spokes of attention are moving out from the prefrontal cortex and to the rim of the wheel. And those spokes could be simple things like the sensations in your body, or they could be chains of thoughts, or they could be emotions that all of a sudden are completely identified with. So all these things take you out to the rim of the wheel. And the idea is, as you notice, like, hey man, I'm on the rim, what's going on? You consciously remember to bring yourself back to your breath. You come back to the hub, back to the hub. And that's, of course, what we do typically in meditation. We're, focusing on the breath, or we're focusing on an image, we're focusing on whatever. We lose our train of thinking, and then we have to bring ourselves back with the breath to the hub. Here's the good news from the point of view of neuroscience. The more times your mind wanders, and for all of us, it's the nature of the mind to think. It's the nature to wander. It's the nature of emotions to come and go. The more you notice these things and just say to yourself, oh my goodness, like there's anger, or oh my goodness, there's my fear. And you accept this. This is just what's happening in your field at the moment. Then breathe yourself back to the hub of the wheel. And what it does is it creates new brain circuits. That's, of course, the big news in the last 15 or 20 years of neuroscience, that our brain is always making new circuitry. And so in that way, we're able to really work with afflictive emotions as a way to open the doorway to that wise self or best self, whatever you call it, the self that's in oneness with all that is. So to summarize, we all need to do whatever the psychological work is of noticing where our patterns came from, perhaps changing the context to realize perhaps maybe a parent, even an abusive parent, has certain benefits. That is, they start us on a healing journey, for example. Doing the work of forgiveness and compassion for them and for ourselves, and then working with our own brains through, for example, the Wheel of Awareness, through meditation, through breathing exercises. And what we've also discovered is that exercise really marries the prefrontal cortex to the midbrain. So it's very important for everybody to get really some good exercise. I'd suggest at least a half an hour of brisk walking or whatever it is that you can do based on, your own body every day. And then, in addition, another thing that turns out to create a shift of activity in the prefrontal cortex toward the compassion centers is very specifically slogans of various sorts. So the Tibetan Buddhists have a set of 69 slogans they call Lojong slogans. And these are, simple sentences with a whole teaching behind them. Because, Neil, when you were speaking, you talked about, first you set a context for a worldview that in and of itself is healing for many people, very much like Tyler Desjardins' worldview of, hey, we're not, human beings who have an occasional spiritual experience, but we're spiritual beings having a human experience, which really tutors us in compassion and awareness. And in that way, we help whatever the mysterious force of life is to expand this universe. But in any case, slogans, people who are in 12-step programs use slogans. Or it may be that you need to make up a series of your own slogans so that when your midbrain is in control and you've lost sight of your wiser self, you can reach into a toolbox that you've customized for yourself and find a way back again. So that's some of the things that I'd suggest.
Joan?
So that's some of the things that I'd suggest.
Joan, can you give me an example of a slogan? I'm so intrigued by what you're saying, and I've never heard it phrased quite that way. My mind is going, if I just had one example of how I could create a slogan, custom make a series of maybe 2 or 3 slogans for Neil.
Here's one. I'm not myself in a 12-step program, but I learned this from a friend. And those of your listeners in 12-step programs may find that I've mangled it a little bit in translation. But this has been very helpful to me. And it's just work it down, don't work it up. So in other words, I'm finding myself, I'm like, somebody has done something and I don't like it. So instead of letting that develop more and more and more force behind it and thinking about it and working it up and getting madder and madder, I work it down and say, this is what is. This is how this person is, and I can either love and accept that, or I need also to be able to say the best way to work it down is to be honest with this person and simply to say, hey, when you did or said this, this is how I felt, and that allows us to clear the field between us and not develop another block and work it up. So work it down instead of working it up. Or another thing that's very useful for me because, one of the sort of sore points in my life and upbringing, and I know a lot of people have this, is I was expected to be perfect all the time. And when I made mistakes, I really was made to feel pretty bad about doing that. And over the years, I realized I've developed a big self-critical pattern, which fortunately has improved quite a bit. But, on some days, the old self-critic pops right up there. And in that case, I use one of the Lojong, the Tibetan Buddhist slogans, very simple, called "Don't Expect Applause." And that brings back everything I know about, like, what perfectionism does to you. So there's a couple of things.
I realized
Go ahead, Neil. Go ahead. I'll go after you.
I realized that I created one for myself without knowing it was a slogan, and that is, it's not opposition, it's composition. And whenever I feel something that's opposing me, or that it feels like it's opposing me in life, I say to myself, that's not opposition, that's composition. It's not what's opposing me, it's what's composing me. As in, compose yourself, Neil, and recreate yourself anew in the face of what you used to think of as opposition. So I guess I have created my own slogan without even knowing it.
Absolutely. That's a terrific one. That's a terrific one. I'm going to borrow it from you. Thank you.